Can a president who is willing to make the choices Donald Trump made during the violence of January 6th ever be trusted with any position of authority in our great nation again?
The thing that strikes me is, we can be appalled, and what we heard last night was appalling, but can we really be surprised? I mean, the history of Donald Trump is he doesn't care about rules. He doesn't care about laws. He doesn't care about institutions. He thinks they're for suckers. He's spent his whole life flouting them. And everything he did during those 5 years sort of led to that moment. This wasn't sort of kind of an unusual occurrence. He did these things in ways large and small. I mean, the man was impeached before all of this happened for shaking down the president of Ukraine, who we now know very well.
But you know what? To Cheney's final point, like, who is the audience she's speaking to now? Maybe the Justice Department, and certainly future Republican primary voters. More importantly, it's a shot across the bow to the Senate Republicans that voted against removing him from office or barring him from serving after the second impeachment.
I do think, and you can speak to this, I do think she's speaking to Republicans.
Yeah.
I think she's telling Republicans, this is a bridge too far. We can't go down this road again.
Here's your off-ramp. We're giving it to you.
There's a group of Republicans who voted for him twice. I voted for him twice. I'm a loyal Republican voter who gave him money, knocked on doors. They gave him their best effort. And I think the audience is that group. You gave Donald Trump your best effort. After seeing this, can you conclude that he gave you his best effort? And in 2024, if you are mortified at the thought that Joe Biden might get reelected or Democrats might reelect someone even more liberal or more progressive, do you want to roll the dice on this guy again after everything you did for him based on what you've seen? And so I do think there's a growing group of Republicans who did everything they could do for him, who now may want to do something else. We're more to come on that, but the polling evidence is there. Yeah. And that's why I think he's looking at the race early now, because he hears the footsteps. Yeah.
She said, I mean, it's pretty clear she would not vote for him. She was saying he cannot be there. Would you?
Again,
if you were the nominee of the Republican Party, you say you're a loyal Republican.
It would be a difficult, I mean, I don't know who the Democrats are going to nominate, but it would be difficult for me to conclude that entrusting him with the power of the presidency again would be wise for the country. Now, that having been said, I am what Joe Biden has done to this country and what I think the Democrats are likely to do in the future is also terrible. And that's the thing. A rematch of these two people would put millions of American voters in a really, really bizarre and terrible position.
Shouldn't fidelity to the Constitution, though, be kind of table stakes for being president of the United States?
Yes, of course. Of course.
I mean, I think what that also should, I was sort of amazed at two moments, to your point, whether the system can hold if he's president again. And I think the answer is no. I think once when you see the Secret Service and what happened to them, here's the Secret Service protecting the vice president. Their leader is the president. They know that the violence is coming from the president. We have a lot of bad things to say about the Secret Service right now, but the fear you heard in their voices is like, we're not trained for this, right? A president going after a vice president, what are we supposed to do? We can't shoot these people. We can't protect the vice president as we want to. And you heard it later, Caitlin and I were talking about the military. The vice president is not in the military chain of command. And here you have the Joint Chiefs calling him and saying, the president is saying nothing to us. Can you help out? Can you command us? The systems did not hold if everything seems crazy, and they will not hold if he's president.
And that is one of the biggest black holes of that day, is what took the National Guard so long to get there and what delayed that process. And Keith Kellogg was Pence's national security advisor, and he was asked, did you ever hear the president ask for the National Guard? No. Did you ever hear the president ask for law enforcement response? No. The committee said, as someone who works in the national security space and the National Security Council, if there were going to be troops called for a rally, is that something you would have been aware of? Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the chain of command, right? So it would go from the Secretary of Defense to the National Security Advisor or the White House and the president, especially with D.C. with its funky rules. So there would be, their inability, so basically the military broke the chain of command, and I'm not sorry about it. Because the president's not returning the calls, and so the Joint Chiefs and the National Security staff have to go to someone, and it ends up being Pence, which, Pence, like, it's about time, right? I mean, we need to hear from you. That's how I left last night.
But this cannot become the norm. We cannot have, this process cannot break all the time. Like, you can't have it so that the president is disconnected from the military
No.
chain of
So
command.
how
I mean,
are you?
Right, so that- you know what we
Elliot,
did?
I wanted you to get in here, and then I want to follow up on that. Go ahead.
No, well, what I would say is, it's, you know, the question is, what happens post-Trump? And you got to remember, this is not just Donald Trump, right? He is the symptom, not the problem. He is the fuel, not the fire. And there is an underlying rot in the country about mistrusting institutions, mistrusting law enforcement and courts and so on, that he's the accelerant that made it much worse. But regardless of whether it's him, if you don't address that, and this is your area as much more than anything else, Julia, but if you don't address that, the underlying problem, you're still back here
A
again, regardless
majority of
whether he's
Americans,
president
a
again.
majority of Americans say they believe that the government is corrupt,
Yes.
and that is rigged against them.
and that justifies extracurricular action.
I
to
actually
do
think that's
something
a
about.
core to Trump's appeal, because he was essentially taking a hammer blow to the institutions that many Americans believe are not functioning and
a lot
are
of the
rigged
discourse
against them.
is
And
that
that's something that has to be
There's
addressed.
this discourse that this was all Donald Trump, that he brought this to the United States, and if Donald Trump is removed as the source of it, it goes
He had
away.
a, he had a
It
feral
loses-
sense for what was going on.
But it
out
loses
there.
oxygen if he's
But it does-
if he's weakened. In other words, they're listening to him. They're listening to his silences. I focus on him because I view him as the leader of a violent organization or a violent movement. And guess how you stop this, or at least you minimize it. You're not going to end the ideology, but you're going to minimize its strength. Is you isolate the leader.
To David's point, I don't think people who have lost all faith in institutions fully exist on the right. I mean, it's clear they also exist on the
Yeah.
left.
I didn't say
And
that.
I know. I just want to, because right now, I mean, for as much as Donald Trump's people wanted to smash Congress and do what they wanted to do on January 6th, there are people right now who would, I'm sure, love to do that to the United States Supreme Court, and who are urging Joe Biden to bypass the Supreme Court and bypass Congress and essentially rule by executive fiat. These are all people, in my opinion, who've completely lost faith in
Yeah,
the
but Scott,
overall
I just
process
don't
of
think
government.
it's a fair argument to sort of both sides insurrection. And
I'm sorry.
even
You
no,
you think it's not a fair argument to point out that someone tried to go kill Brett Kavanaugh or threatened to burn down the Supreme Court? These people have the same autocratic.
That wasn't led by Biden. That wasn't led by Biden.
right,
Come on.
come on.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'm gonna be real here.
I'm not saying it was led by Biden.
Both sides.
They coddled it. They coddled it.
It doesn't matter.
They
It doesn't
coddled
matter.
it. They
There's
said,
a
"Oh, it's fine to go
difference.
protest."
Whatever you
And
believe,
it's not.
whatever you believe, Scott, about what the Democrats are doing, just give us a break here on this one. That Trump
No, I'm not gonna
actually
give you a break.
directed the
No,
violence.
we've had this-
You don't think he directed the violence?
Yes, of course I do. I've
Okay,
said it
so
many
then-
times,
right.
but I'm telling you that David's point is correct. There's a whole group of Americans who've completely given up on our process and institutions,
That's a
and they
different
don't
story.
fully exist on the right, which I think you think they do, but I don't believe they do.
I talk about violence all the time for a reason, because I want to separate the policy
And I just want to be clear,
differences
Scott.
that
I
we
mean,
have.
but you actually, people are seriously talking about charging the president of the United States with a crime of inciting an insurrection or obstructing acts of Congress. You just don't have. Now, I am not saying that or dismissing the conduct of people who threaten Supreme Court justice. Of course not. I was a federal law clerk and as a congressional. Like, look, come on. But at the same time, the president is literally might be investigated by the Justice Department, being investigated by Fulton County, Georgia.
I just have to go back for 1 second here. As I said earlier, if the President of the United States openly and flagrantly says these rules, these laws, these norms don't matter, these institutions are crooked and corrupt, and anything you do, therefore, that crowd out there wasn't all Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. There were regular Americans who were told that the election was stolen, and it was their patriotic duty
And you
to
know
go
what?
down and disrupt this process.
That was distilled in the outtakes of Trump's video when he said, I don't want to say the election is over.
Right.
I just want to say Congress is certified.
And he doesn't want to say the election is over today, which is why I want to wrap this up by again going back to the question that Liz Cheney asked, where she said, can a president who is willing to make the choice that Donald Trump made during the violence of January 6th ever be trusted with any position of authority in our great nation again? It's hard to imagine that was a rhetorical question, David.
No, I think this is the project she's been working from the
Right.
beginning. She's talking to the Justice Department, but more broadly, she's talking to her own party and the American people, because she knows, as someone who does believe in the Constitution, ultimately the people will decide whether Donald Trump should be entrusted with that power again. And she's making a case to them that cannot be.
He's not saying it as subtly, or I'm sorry, he's not saying it as directly. He's more subtle about it. But this is the case that Mike Pence is making for President of the United States.
yes.
This is his message: is I'm going to give you everything you wanted about the Trump presidency without the absolute horrific judgment that he had in and around January 6th. That's his message.
I'm not sure that Liz Cheney wants to leave it to Mike Pence, but but it is
I
very
think she wants to
interesting.
maybe leave it to Liz Cheney potentially.
That may be so.
Well, I think we'll
may be
we'll
free in a
agree
few
now. The
weeks.
policy without the violence should be the future of the United States.
All
And
right.
I think they've been successful on that.
Juliet, Elliot, Scott, David, we got more than our money's worth this morning. You guys have to come back. You guys, that was a wonderful.
It's worth all of you sleeping for 3 collective hours.